God. It's a word that is impossible to define in its entirety. We can't define that word in its entirety. How do you explain God to someone in a way where they can completely wrap their mind around who he is? He's just so amazing. He's so amazing. He's good. He's love. He's a friend that sticks closer than a brother. I mean, all of those things are accurate descriptions, but it doesn't even come close to the extent of his character. They're pieces of his character, but how do you wrap your mind around that one word? God. How do you wrap your mind around the person of God? It's deep. What if it was your job to explain God to somebody? What if that was your job? How do you think you would do? Go ahead and go out there and explain God in his entirety to another person. How do you think you would do? I know me, I would give it my best shot. I would try my best. But then I'd leave saying, and that doesn't even scratch the surface. I'm out. I can't even, what I said about God up to this point isn't even the fact that I said he's love and that he's a friend that sticks closer than a brother. Those are just words. The depth of those words I can't reach. There's no way to explain God in his entirety. I believe Moses was given one of the most difficult jobs in history. I'm so thankful that I'm not Moses. That was a rough job. God called him to deliver the children of Egypt from Egyptian bondage in order to make a people for himself. He's calling Israel out. And he says, Moses, I want you to bring them out because I want to make a people for myself out of this nation. Moses' job was to introduce God to a people who only knew of him in a nation that had completely rejected him. This is their life. This is their culture. This generation of Israelites only knew Egyptian culture. They were born in it. That's all they ever knew. Years prior to Moses' life, the Egyptians were very familiar with who God was, though. They knew about God. God used Joseph to introduce the nation to himself. Joseph was sold into slavery. If you remember the story, Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers, sold into Egyptian bondage, and for years he spent his time in an Egyptian dungeon. But Joseph knew God. He knew God, and even though things weren't going his way, he never held any of that against God. He never held it against God. Eventually, he was released from prison, and he was elevated to second in command in Egypt, taken all the way to the top, from the bottom to the top. And God used Joseph to announce himself to the Egyptian people. I want you to announce me to the Egyptian people. And then he made Egypt the world power of that day. Through this one man, he took Egypt from nothing and rose it to the world power in that day. And he took Joseph from nothing and brought him to second in command, right below Pharaoh. And he led Egypt. But after Joseph died, everything changed. Everything changed. Look at Exodus chapter 1 and verse 8. It says, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. As long as Joseph was alive, everybody was informed about God. Everybody knew about God as long as Joseph was there, because Joseph made sure they knew about God. Now a new sheriff's in town, a new king shows up, and he's not familiar with the person of Joseph or his God. He doesn't know anything about this, and he doesn't want to know anything about this. For over 400 years, the nation of Israel was in bondage to the Egyptians. The Pharaoh rose up and said, man, the Israelites are having a lot of kids. A lot of people are growing. This is one nation that's within this other nation. Their population's growing. And what if our enemies attack us? Will they side with our enemies? So what they did was they put them in captivity and they ruled over the Israelites. 4 centuries separate Moses from Joseph. So let's just get a timeline going there. 4 centuries separate Moses from Joseph. Now the Israelites need to be reacquainted with God. They know of him, but they really don't know him. They'd forgotten about who he was. So God brings Moses in onto the scene, to present God to millions of people who were unaware of his sovereignty. Look at Exodus chapter 7 and verse 5. God says, "And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand on Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them." See, the Egyptians had created many gods of their own. They had many gods. The Israelites had become accustomed to that way of life. They grew up, they were born into the Egyptian culture, they lived in the Egyptian culture, they knew about all the gods. That was just part of life. So God brings in 10 plagues to tear down the Egyptian gods. Each plague refuted the powers that were given to these man-made deities, proving that God was sovereign. See, the Egyptian people manufactured their own truth. That's what they were doing. This is now, forget the God of the universe, forget the God of creation, forget all that. Now we will make our own truth. They had a goddess of the sun. They had a god of fertility. They had the god of the rivers. And the list goes on and on and on. They had many gods. So God sends plagues into Egypt to show that their man-made gods were powerless. You know the God of the sun? Your God of the sun? Explain the darkness. Okay, it's dark. It's really dark. It's one of the plagues. Like, where'd the power of your God go? Like, not good. What the power of the God over the rivers? The rivers turned to blood. What about your God? Like, that God's not doing so good today. God brings in a plague to show these gods are man-made and they are powerless. These are just made up realities. They're just imagined, but they are not true gods. At the same time God sent all the plagues in, he was making himself known to the Egyptians, desiring their repentance. It wasn't just something he was doing to be mean to the Egyptians. He was trying to reveal himself to the Egyptians, and he desired their repentance. But the ball of acceptance or rejection was in their court, but God did make sure they knew who he was through those plagues. The reason that the majority of the Egyptians chose to reject God is because of their refusal to see him as the authority. That's all there was. That's all it was. We will not submit to that. That's all that happened. That's the only reason why the Egyptians didn't just walk out with the Israelites, because they refused to see the Israelites' God as the authority. After the nation of Israel was delivered from Egypt, God decides to get reacquainted with his people. Remember, these were his people before they went into Egypt. These are still his people, but they just know of God. They're not familiar with him as a person. They just know of him. Through the Exodus, he proved that the Egyptian false gods were fallible. Every one of them. They had no power to control these things. God trumps those gods, because those were man-made gods. God was not man-made. These were gods that this generation of Israelites had known their entire lives. We know of the sun god. We know of the god of the rivers. We know of the god of fertility. We know of all these gods. To them, it was just part of culture. It was just part of life. But God wanted them to understand that he was infallible. I am actually infallible. These gods are fallible. I'm infallible. And he wanted them to know his character. So he gives them the law. God gives the Israelites the law. This is where I'm going to ask every one of you to go ahead and consider looking at this from a different perspective today. I want you to see the law in a different way. God sees the situation of the Israelites. They don't really know me. They know of me. I'm just one of the many gods. That's how they were raised. I want them to know that I'm the one true God, so I'm going to help them get to know me. I'm going to give them the law. The law wasn't necessarily given as a list of do's and don'ts. Even though it is do not do this and do this, we understand that that's there, but it's not necessarily given just for that purpose. It was given as a way of revealing who God is. So I want you to look at the law in a from a different angle here. Thou shalt not lie, because I am honest. I don't want you to lie because I'm honest. Thou shalt not commit adultery, because I am faithful. Thou shalt not steal, because God is generous. God is generous. Thou shalt not covet, because God is your provider. in giving those laws, it wasn't just do's and don'ts, just a bunch of rules he gave to people. He was revealing his own character to these people by giving them the law. Each law reveals something about the goodness of God. Every one of them. Don't do this because that's not who I am. That doesn't match my character. These are not laws that are designed to bully or push us around. You will do what I said. A lot of people look at God that way. Yeah, he gets his way, we don't get our way. We know he wins because he's bigger. That whole mindset of God. He's just bullying us or pushing us around. That's not what this is. It's to tell us more about our infallible God. The laws were given so we could learn about his own character. Look at how Moses describes him to the children of Israel. Look at Deuteronomy 32 and verse 4. He is the rock. His work is perfect. For all his ways are justice, a God of truth and without injustice. Righteous and upright is he. He is the author of truth. He can do no wrong. He is righteous. He is holy. He is just. This is who God is. This is the God that Moses is trying to introduce to Israel. God's the one who set the standard of what is morally right and what is morally wrong. God set that standard. He is good, and anything that opposes his character is wrong. So there you go. There's right and wrong. God is good. That's good. Anything that opposes that would be bad. That just simplifies everything. God is good. If it's in opposition to his character, it is bad. That he's the one that set up the morals. He's the one that set the standard of what's morally right and what's morally wrong. He's always known that he was going to face opposition with sinful mankind, though. But that in itself was not going to change who he was. As Moses said, his work is perfect. God can do no wrong. He does not make mistakes. He can do no wrong. We have a God that is infallible. He does not make mistakes. He cannot do wrong because that would go against his very nature. To do wrong, to mess up, to make a mistake would go against his nature. That would be like expecting fire not to be hot. Expect all you want. It just is. It just is. Okay, I demand that fire is not hot. Well, good luck with that. You have a good time. Fire's hot because that's just the nature. It's its nature. You can expect it not to be hot, but it just is. You can ask God, you can say he is fallible, but God is infallible. He just is. That is his nature. He just is. He cannot make a mistake. At times we may not agree with the call he makes. That's happened in my own life. I don't like this. I don't like the call that you made, God. But it doesn't make the call wrong. It does not make that call wrong because an infallible God made the call. I might not like it, but you know why I don't like it? Because I don't understand it the same way he understands it. That is what makes me wrong and him right. He sees the whole picture. I only see the part that affected me. So he's still infallible. We don't have to like the call, but it doesn't make the call wrong. I want you to imagine a bizarre situation with me. Let's just go weird for a second here. Think of it as if it's a reality, even though it's not. I hope it's not. But let's go bizarre here. Imagine that you walk into your house and you see your elementary age kid standing at the door waiting for you to walk in. He wants to talk to you. When you say hello, they say, I'm going to need you to sit down for a minute. There are going to be a few changes around here. And you're like, okay. So you have a seat. And you humor them just for a few minutes. There's going to be some changes around here. I need you to sit down. Like, okay, all right. Then they proceed to tell you that they're not in favor of the way that you lead the household, and they're going to go ahead and take it from here. The kid has been watching the Snickers commercials. They've been watching a lot of them. The Snickers commercials have been coming on, and it advertises that Snickers bars are satisfying. The kid's not satisfying. He's not satisfied having vegetables for dinner. or lunch. Or if they don't eat it for dinner, they have them for breakfast. They're not satisfied with this method of your leadership. So they inform you that Snickers will be on the menu from now on. How's that scenario working for you? Everybody thinking, okay, I guess I just submit. No, no, it doesn't work for you. We laugh because it's absurd. It's absurd to think of that as a reality. You don't feed your kid vegetables because it's what they want. You feed your kid vegetables because it's what's best for them. It's good for them. I don't like it. You don't have to. But you do have to eat them. But I don't like it. That wasn't part of the condition. You don't have to like it. My mom always said that all the time. You don't have to like it. You just have to eat it. I feel like I lose in that scenario. You do. Change your like and dislike. Or don't like it, but eat it. So my mom gave them to me. You give them to your kids because it gives them nutrients. It keeps them healthy. It's good for them. Whether they like it or not, it's good for them. They might not be happy with your call, but it is the right call. You made the right call. They might not like it, but it is the right call. We're living in a time where God's sovereignty is rarely considered. Look at our culture, look at the generation, look at what's going on around us. We live in a society, we live in a time where God's sovereignty is not considered. People determine truth by how they feel. They determine it by how they feel. We might not be living as slaves in Egypt, but we are living in a culture that's becoming less and less familiar with the character of God. You can see it on the television. You can just go to a store and listen to people talk. You can, everywhere you go, we live in a culture that is becoming less and less familiar with his character. They know of him. They don't know him. This is a message that our world needs to hear. Look at Moses' words one more time. Before I move forward in this message, I want you to look at his words one more time. Deuteronomy 32:4. He is the rock. His word is perfect. For all his ways are justice, a God of truth and without injustice. Righteous and upright is he. We have a God who is perfect and infallible. He cannot make mistakes. He is infallible. He is a God of love. He is a God of kindness. He's the one that created each and every one of us. Without him, we wouldn't exist. You are here because he said that would be okay. If he wouldn't have said that's okay, you wouldn't be here. You're here because he created you. The reason we have life is because God gave us life. That is why you have life. Science, medicine, technology is incredible to me. It's incredible to me. My phone, they call it a smartphone, and I'm insulted by that because sometimes I think it's true. I think it may be smarter than me. And it's just a piece of technology. But you look at technology, you look at what's going around, and it's amazing what people can do. It's amazing what mankind can do. Now, they might be able, let's say they can create a heart, that they can create a complete human body. Let's say they can create that. You know, one thing they cannot do to that body, they cannot make it live. They cannot give it life. Do all you can make it flinch, electrocute it, it will flinch, but that doesn't make it alive. They cannot put life into that body because God is the giver of life. Look at Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 and Psalms 36:9. It says, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." Psalms 36:9 says, "For with you is the fountain of life." I am going to say a few things that will undoubtedly shake people today. But I believe with all my heart it needs to be said. But before I say it, I want everyone to know that there is 0% judgment attached to what I'm going to say. For the rest of the message, 0 judgment. 0. I just want to present our infallible God to you. That's all I want to do. A lot of topics are floating around the news and in society today. Just turn it on and you'll hear them. I want to touch on a couple of these topics. On the topic of abortion, I do want to show you where God is present in that topic. I want to show you where God sits in that topic. If a person is alive, it's because God gave that person life, and it's nobody's right to take that life away from them. It doesn't matter what kind of event brought them to be. If they're alive, it's because God was involved in that part, because God is the giver of life. He has a plan for them. Their heart would not beat if God didn't authorize that heart to beat. God is the giver of life, not us. Not us. With that being said, even though I just said that, with that being said, there are situations where difficult choices have to be made for the protection of life. Sometimes, if the baby lives, you lose the mom. Sometimes there are difficult situations there where you have to make a call for the protection of life. And in doing so, you may end up losing life in that decision. Sometimes life can be lost in those decisions. Please don't misunderstand me. I do have a lot of compassion concerning this topic. A lot of compassion here. And it doesn't matter what you've done in the past. We're not there. We're here today. That's gone. This is today. I have a lot of compassion about this. But if God creates life, he did it perfectly, and he did it with a purpose in mind. If a heart begins to beat, it's because God said, go. Not because the doctor did, but because God did, because God is the giver of life. The scientists can go, man, how do we make it live? You're going to have to ask the giver of life. God is the only one that can make it live. Even God's son who died, God said, go. Even after death, he can provide life, but God is the giver of life. God's the one that authorized it. But if God creates a life, he did it perfectly. But this topic ushers in another sensitive topic. If God creates a life, he does it in a specific way. He doesn't just create life, he does it specifically. He does it in a specific way. Look at Psalms 139 and verse 14. It says, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. When God creates a person, he creates them just as he designed them to be. Fearfully and wonderfully made by an infallible God who makes no mistakes. He's the one who picked the genetics. He's the one who picked the chromosomes. He picked the features. He picked the gender. He picked it all. And you were created by an infallible God. He made that person out of love and detailed perfection. A loving God did that. A loving God did that. He has a plan for them, and his design is part of that plan. He knows so much more than we do. He's really good at what he does. And when he does something, as Moses says, his works are perfect. He does not make mistakes. Today we have conflicting messages being screamed at us from all different directions. Sometimes people have fear of letting God make a choice for them. And sometimes we just tell God that we're not satisfied with his choices and we're going to demand that we have our desires met. People see this as humorous when you present it as a little kid saying Snickers will be on the menu. You're like, oh yeah, we can, that's funny. But when you present it this way, it's not so funny. It's not so funny. God, I know you're infallible. I know you are the final authority, but I'll take it from here. It's not funny when you bring it into real topics. But to see it as an elementary kid telling you, hey, go ahead and sit down, there's going to be some changes made around here, that's humorous. That's humorous until you realize, oh, wait, we do that. That's not funny anymore. Suck the humor right out of that scenario. Just sucked it right out. It's not funny anymore. The truth is, God is infallible. He was infallible when he created your life. He hasn't changed. He's still infallible. Moses' job was to introduce God to a culture that was unfamiliar with him. I want you to meet your infallible God. He really is infallible. God has given us the same job. God has given you and I the same job. So I want to show you what your job description is. Let me show this to you. 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 20 says, "Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God." We are ambassadors of Christ to bring people to God. That God gave you that job, God gave me that job. Let's introduce his character to the world. Let's introduce God to the world. You are to be that introduction. I am to be that introduction. That's our job. Introduce them. Go ahead and let them know about me. He is perfect. His works are perfect. He is a God of love. He can do no wrong. And he loves you with all his heart. Can I introduce him to you? But what if I don't like his call? It doesn't make his call wrong. It just means you oppose what he did. That puts us in the wrong, not God. Because God can do no wrong. It goes against his character. This means that we are to live according to his agenda, not our agenda. When you go to work and your boss tells you what he wants you to do you say, yeah, see, we're not going to go with your plan? That's not where you work anymore. If that's how you go in, that's not where you work anymore. Because the one with authority says this is the agenda, and you don't work outside of that agenda. You do what the authority says. This is God's agenda, not our agenda. There's a mindset out there that God only wants what he wants, and that his people are going to condemn you if you don't do things the way he says to do them. That is a mindset out there. That's reality. People see God this way, and they see Christianity this way. And this is a huge problem if this is the introduction that people have to God. That's a huge problem. He's been misrepresented. People who struggle with the topic of life, whether it is to allow life or just to live life as God created them, are real people with real struggles. You don't look at it and go, well, you're just weird, so I'm not going to associate with you at all. These are real people with real struggles. These are real battles that they are face to face with. And sometimes they make decisions that are not something God would have decided, but even though they made that decision, doesn't make them discardable. They are real people with real struggles, and they need to be loved like every other person out there. It doesn't change the truth. Maybe you made a truth for yourself. I say this is true, and this is the right way to do it. And God says, that's not how I would have played that. But you are still not discardable. Let's go. Let me love you. That was then, this is now. Let's move forward. Let me love you. Let's grow together in a relationship. Don't define yourself by actions. Define yourself. God's the one that gives you your value, not society, not your actions, not anything like that. God is the one that gives you your value. So God says, still not worth throwing away. Worth dying for, not worth discarding. Because we have a good God. His character needs to be introduced to the world. God can help, but people won't approach him if he's represented wrong. Why would you want to approach a God who's been represented like God has been represented for so many years? If you don't do it just like he says, he'll smite you. No. God's not a smiter. That's not our God. Jesus took the punishment. God is not aiming at you. His wrath was poured out on his son, so you could avoid it. That's the God our culture needs to be introduced to. But if he's represented wrong, why would they ever want to approach that God? So what's our job as the ambassadors? 1 Peter 2 and verse 21. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. Christ was despised for the message he preached. He was despised for it. People felt like he was rejecting them because he was rejecting their version of truth. Just think about Jesus' ministry. They thought he was rejecting them because he was rejecting their version of truth. The Pharisees preached that good works would get you to heaven. You got to obey the law. You got to do it perfectly. That's how you're going to get to heaven. Well, Jesus refuted this, and he was put to death for that. You reject us because you reject our truth. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You don't get to the Father but by me. And they killed him for it because his message went against their version of truth. They wanted Jesus to comply to their variety of right and wrong, their variety of truth. But God is infallible. He is truth, and he cannot change. Cannot change. Tell that fire not to be hot, and then jump in. Doesn't change it. It doesn't change it. The truth is truth, and it cannot be changed. The Pharisees' version of truth was not good for them. It gave them an unhealthy view of identity and self-worth. That's what their version of truth was doing to them. This is the same way people may feel about us if we disagree with the way they see things as true. They may not like your message, but I want you to notice how Jesus approached the issue of false truth. I want you to see how he did it, because this is exactly how we are going to do it if we are following his steps. And that's what you're supposed to do, be his ambassador, his agenda, not yours. So do it as he did it, imitators of Christ, following his steps. So I want you to see how he did it. John chapter 3 and verse 17. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Love was the approach Jesus took, even when that message angered the people. I am not condemning you for your choices. I am not condemning you for how you see right and wrong. I am not condemning you for what you call truth. But I do love you, and I want to introduce you to truth. Because I love you, I don't condemn you. I don't condemn you. People struggle with all different kinds of sin. All different kinds of sin. But every sin costs God his Son's life. Every one of them. You might not like this person because they are a mass murderer. But the person over here with the white lie, you're like, that one's good to go. Same penalty. Cost the same thing. Cost Jesus his life. Doesn't matter how we rank sin, God sees it as a violation of his character. It goes against his character, and that is the sin Jesus died for. It doesn't matter how you rank it, same consequence, same penalty. We live in a generation that declares truth to be whatever they desire it to be. That's the culture we live in. I am the one that declares what truth is, and you need to comply to what I say truth is. Funny when it's the elementary Snickers kid. Not so funny now. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Truth cannot be altered because it's already been determined by an infallible God. Truth cannot be changed. An infallible God set that up. People do not need to be judged or condemned for trying to alter truth. Remember, if Jesus didn't come to condemn, then it's absolutely not our job to condemn. If he's not going to do it, why in the world do we think we can? You don't do that. It's not our job to condemn. What people need to be introduced to is the character of God. They need to be shown how valuable they are, just the way their infallible designer set it up. Just like that. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. But I don't like it. It's okay. You need to get your value from him. Not from all the events that happened in your life, not the way people treated you, not the way society tells you it should be. He's the one that gives you your value. And you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And you are loved by a God and that we can't even explain the depths of that. He absolutely adores you. He absolutely adores you. And that doesn't even come close to telling you how much he absolutely adores you. There's no way we can reach the depths of what that means. He's incredible. They don't need to be rejected for the choices they made. So as children of God, if we have been rejecting people or condemning people for the choices they made, stop it. You're misrepresenting our God. Stop it. Because his character needs to be shown through your life, not your opinion. People really don't care about your opinion. You're like, oh no, everybody wants to hear about my opinion. Yeah, and fire's not hot. It's not true. There's a lot of people that don't care about your opinion. You're not the final authority. Point people to who is the final authority. That's what we're supposed to be doing. They need to be presented with the choices God made, not be rejected for the choices they've made. Your infallible God did a good job, did a real good job. And they need to see how that complements who they are. They need to see that. When people see God as a person who can make mistakes, then he is no longer seen as a reliable authority. He cannot sincerely be trusted. Do we understand that? If you do not see God as a God who is infallible, if you think God can make mistakes, then he cannot be seen as a reliable source. He cannot be trusted because even he can make mistakes. If we start viewing God like that, then who do we go to for truth? I guess it's your choice and mine, and we make up our own truth. And that's a dangerous place to be. I do understand that these are difficult topics that I'm bringing up right now. I do understand that. But people need to know that Christians are open to talking about these things without placing any judgment out there. They need to know, oh, I can talk to you about it. We don't have to agree, but I know if I talk to you, I will also not be judged. That's how people need to see Christianity. They need to know we can talk. We can talk. Introduce me to your God. Introduce me to his character. Introduce me to this infallible person who set up morals and truth. Go ahead and talk to me about him. And I know I won't be judged. That's a good place to be. As Christians, we need to understand that God cannot operate outside of his nature. So look at 1 John 4:8. This is his nature. God is love. He did not come to condemn. He came to love. That's what he came for. God, who cannot make mistakes, also cannot operate outside of love. It's just who he is. It's who he is. Follow in his steps. On February 4th, 1983, Karen Carpenter, many of you know the name, you know of the person. Karen Carpenter died from a distorted view of what truth was. Think about her story if you're familiar with her story. She had a distorted view of truth. She was convinced that she was overweight, even though at one time she only weighed about 80 pounds. She still saw herself as overweight. She lived her life battling against truth because she saw this as reality. So she spent her life continuing to try to lose weight because she saw herself as overweight and unhealthy. And it didn't matter what anybody told her. She knew what was true in her own mind. Her story still breaks people's hearts today. She died at 32 years old. Why? Why? And people wish she could have valued herself for who she really was and for the reality. They wish she could have accepted the truth about herself. A false sense of truth is a very harmful thing. It's a very, very harmful thing. It can destroy people and it can destroy cultures if you don't understand where truth comes from. But a false representation of God can do the same thing. It will do the same thing. Say, well, I believe God's infallible, so I'm good. Do you judge other people who don't? Yes. Then you're destroying the culture just as much as they are. You're doing the same thing. because you think in your mind that truth is that you have the right to condemn because God opposes what they're doing. That is also a false truth. That is not your job. So they can have a false truth, but a lot of times God's people have a false truth too, and we're all doing the exact same thing. We just think we're all in the right. We think we're all doing the right thing because my fire's not hot. But it's still messed up and it's still destructive. So we need to be there for people. We need to reintroduce our God to our culture. We need to do this, but we need to do it in a specific way. We need to do it in a specific way. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 15. Speaking the truth in love. That's how you do it. That's how you do it. Don't just go out there and start speaking the truth. People don't like that. Like, wow, you are hideous. That could be true. That could be true. How much love was there? Not an ounce. It might be the truth, but it needs to be blended with love. You need to speak the truth in love. Don't just start telling everybody what God thinks, because the truth is, it's not always what God thinks. It's what you think God thinks. Speak the truth in love. Our God is loving. He is kind. He is generous. He is perfect. He is infallible. He is infallible. And he has all of our best interests in mind. Every person on the planet, he has our best interest in mind. God is trustworthy even when we're scared and even when we're struggling with topics. He is still trustworthy. Even when we're confused and we can't see a clear future. Even when we've been abused or truth has been distorted in our own mind, he is still trustworthy. He is infallible, and that's the truth. We have an infallible God, and he is perfectly in love with every one of us. Trust him. Trust him. And let the world know you can trust him, because you were fearfully and wonderfully made by a God who is infallible. He loves you. You can trust him.